Is violence an integral part of every resistance movement? Every liberation movement in history has been split on this principle of violence versus non-violence. During the civil rights movement, this was a strong point of contention between the Black Panther Party, the Black Power movement, Nation of Islam, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King. I know your book has a section called What Would Gandhi Say? And you mentioned the Great March of Return, which was a non-violent demonstration. Even in the Indian independence struggle, this was a point of contention between Mahatma Gandhi and Subhash Chandra Bose. Nelson Mandela himself conceded after the Sharpeville massacre that just non-violent methods, they're going to be insufficient. Many revolutionaries have advocated for the use of violence. Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, Fidel Castro, in a speech interestingly titled "History Will Absolve Me," given everything we just spoke about, he said that we were taught that liberty is not begged for, but won with the blade of a machete. And after the 1956 Suez Canal crisis, the Second Arab-Israeli War, the streets of Cairo sang the songs of Kulthum, her rendition of Ahmad Shawqi's poem Saulu Kalbi, where they sang the words Wama Nailu Matallabi Bittamani, Walekin tu Khudud al Dunya Galaba. Not through hope will the prize be obtained. The world must be taken through struggle. Can a resistance movement just survive on non-violence, or is it imperative and inevitable that you have to commit these condemnable acts of violence to actually reach your goal?
I can't say with any kind of certitude that in every situation one has to resort to violence, one has to resort to armed force. What I would say is the following. For two reasons, a moral reason and a practical reason. It should be the last resort. The moral reason is taking of human life is obviously, there but for the grace of God go I. You don't know how many days I marvel at the fact that I'm already reaching the end of my life, and I lived. How many lives in struggles for justice and truth? The protagonists, they died, they were killed. All of my heroes, except a couple, okay, Paul Robeson lived to the end of his life, W.E.B. Du Bois lived to the end of his life, but by and large, Martin Luther King was dead at 39, Malcolm X was dead at 39, Gandhi, okay, at an older age, but he was assassinated. I'm the fortunate one. I lived. And I like the fact that I clung to life. I do. I'm glad I lived. Not sure why, but I am. But for the grace of God go I. One has to always bear in mind that the life that's lost could be your own. And if you cling to life and if you love life, I asked my super the other day, I said, always such a positive mood. You emit such positive energy. Why is that? And he said, because I love life. I love life. I'm so happy to be alive. So violence may sound trivial, but sometimes we have to remember the trivial fact, what seems to be trivial. Violence means loss of life. And so a morally serious person has to contend with the fact that once you make the resort to violence, you are going to be depriving a life or a large number of lives of that which you attach so much value to living. But there's also, I don't want to say but, I'll say and. There's a practical question. In any struggle in any struggle that involves violence, the most ruthless are the ones who end up on top. That's just a fact.
Yeah.
Those who are capable of manifesting the most violence, the most ruthless violence, once it's down to violence, the people who end up on top are not very nice people. That's just a fact. You know why Nelson Mandela ended up a nice person? Guess why? Because he was in jail. He didn't have to engage in the ugliness of that violent struggle. It wasn't all violent, but parts of it were. There was torture that was committed in the camps of the ANC, came out during the Truth and Reconciliation process. He got to have clean hands because he was in jail. I think he would have been a very different person. You know, he once said of his wife, Winnie Mandela, who was pretty brutal. You know, she killed a member of what was called the Soweto Soccer Club, Stompy. She was cheering on the necklacing of the South African whites. You know, they put the tires around their necks and then set them on fire. And he said to her, he said in his autobiography, I have it over there, Strides, A Long Walk to Freedom. He said, actually, I think Winnie had it worse than me because Winnie was put in isolation. She was banned. He said, I was in jail. I had my comrades. Was it wonderful spending 28 years in Robbins Island? But he said, I think she actually had it worse than him. Worse than me, he said. And in the same way, I think that, along the same lines, one has to be cognizant of the fact that if you win a power struggle born of violence, you're not going to be a very nice guy. And it has, to put it, it's old-fashioned, it's cliche-ish, but it's true. Violence corrupts. And there's almost inevitably a trivialization of life that accompanies violence. I think that's what happened to Mao. Mao Zedong, the leader of the Chinese Revolution, in the course of the Civil War lasted about 30 years from the time the Chinese communists began and they win power in 1949. And in the course of that Civil War, every member of his family was killed. And that can't but have a callousing, a hardening effect on your soul. You come to see death in a kind of matter-of-fact way, and you begin to attach less significance to it. So Mao has, in my opinion, we can disagree till the end of time, he has a very humane vision of a communist society, and he is absolutely, sincerely committed to the transformation of the lives of the Chinese masses, those hundreds of millions of people who are steeped in the most numbing poverty, and he envisages a better life for them. But in the course of trying to realize that vision, he is very callous about life. And I think that's in part because of having gone through the Civil War, when he saw all of his relations get murdered, killed, die. That kind of violence has a callousing effect. It's not maybe the perfect analogy, but it kind of, even in the most humane and decent struggles, it has a kind of mafia-like callousing effect when you watch, The Godfather or other films, and the ease with which they extinguish life.
Mhm.
So, for moral reasons, there but for the grace of God go I. And for practical political reasons, if you have a humane vision of what you want the outcome of politics to be, yes, violence may, and some, it may be many, it may be most instances, violence might be necessary, but you should always bear in mind it has to be the last resort. The last resort.